I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record Podcast.
Fargo. I love Fargo. I love the 1996 Coen brothers film Fargo. We've had this discussion, I think, off recording. What is the great achievement film of the brothers Coen? You believe it to be The Big Lebowski, which I love, but I think it is Fargo. I also love the television series Fargo on FX and the showrunner Noah Hawley's take on an expansion of that mythos into the anthology series, which may be my favorite TV show possibly ever.
Really?
I really
That's
love
a high bar.
And we've had a chance recently for me to revisit it and for Rob to watch it. I've been encouraging him to get into this show for some time. And so when Rob decided that he would start to watch the early, at least season one, I'm like, I should watch season one. I should rewatch it so that we can talk about it.
Which you rewatched much faster than I watched.
Yes. And rewatching it reminded me just how much I love it. And it's probably been around 3 years since I'd seen season one, and I've probably seen season one 4 or 5 times.
Really?
And it freaking holds up. Like, very few things, to my mind, hold up as well or as enjoyable on repeat viewing as Fargo. And I think 3 years is like a good gap between viewings because you forget enough of it that it kind of comes fresh again.
Yeah.
But I so enjoyed it, even though we don't really talk about TV series as much on this podcast. I wanted to do an episode on this season, and I'm open to doing one on season 2, not so much season 3. But this episode is called 10 Things I Love About Season 1 of Fargo.
Okay.
And we have talked very little about the series off mic because I'm going to kind of use this as an excuse for us to talk about the show because I've heard very little from you
and we
on it.
intentionally, Nate decided shortly after that I told him that I was watching this that we were going to record an episode about it.
Yeah.
And so for the weeks that it's taken me to watch this, we have avoided talking about it. Now, I should clarify, this didn't take me weeks because I didn't like this. I loved it, but I was watching it on my own, not with my wife, and it is the type of show you should not be watching while you're doing something else. You need to be focused.
You need to be focused. Put down the cell phone. Watch it.
But I did not have the time to do that in a short period of time. It took me a couple weeks to get through all of it.
And this is going to be extremely spoiler heavy. So I would recommend that you watch the series before you listen to this. But even if you don't, even if you listen to this first, I think maybe it will pique your interest.
Yeah.
Because this is a great show.
Yeah.
So this is...
with a great cast.
Freaking great cast.
They had to have invested just to get the cast they got for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 10 things I love about Fargo in no particular order other than number 1, which is Gus and Molly. I love Gus and Molly. They may be my favorite couple of television.
Okay.
So who's Gus and Molly and why do I love them? So Molly Solverson, played by Allison Tolman in a career-making role, is a deputy in the Brainerd, Minnesota Police Department. And she stumbles upon or gets involved in a situation where they find this car by the side of the road, and eventually they find a frozen man in his underwear some distance from it. And this is the beginning of a mystery that she becomes deeply involved in and becomes basically her obsession throughout the course of the series. And there's a lot of things that branch off this and other reasons why she becomes so invested in it. But she is a lady in her early 30s. She's pretty enough, but she's kind of heavy set, and she's not super feminine. She loves her job. That's her passion in life, and she has more or less reconciled herself to the fact that she will never marry until she meets Gus Grimley, played by the wonderful Colin Hanks. Gus Grimley is a man who lives in Duluth, Minnesota, who lets off a man that he pulls over because he freaks him out and by implication threatened the man's daughter. Gus Grimley is a widower whose wife passed away when the daughter was pretty young, and he's raising her by himself. He's a good man, and played by Tom Hanks. His son, Colin Hanks.
Yeah.
Which is perfect casting.
Yeah.
And he eventually figures out that this man that he let go was involved in much worse crimes that related to things that happened in Brainerd. So he fesses up to it and makes contact with the Brainerd Police Department. Just so happens that Molly's the person that he talks to.
Bemidji.
Bemidji. Sorry. Bemidji. So makes contact with that police department, gets to know Molly, and he has brought his daughter, played by a 12-ish-year-old Joey King, who's gone on to bigger things.
Yeah, Greta Grimley.
And there's this connection instantly, because this is a nice guy who also reminds Molly of her dad, who is played by Keith Carradine, who's at the time that this story takes place, which is 2006, early 2006, is a retired police officer, state police in Minnesota, who's now running a little coffee shop diner, and he walks with kind of a limp because he was shot, and that's what forced him into retirement. But she sees in Colin Hanks and his daughter, herself and her dad. This instant connection, because she lost her mom when she was quite young. And to just see that romance bloom, and there's a point where Gus accidentally shoots her.
Yeah.
And she's in the hospital, and he's just distraught and just keeps bringing her flowers. Even when she's back in the police department, her desk is covered with flowers. They're having this talk on the phone. And it's like, are the flowers too much? Like, oh no. And like, she turns on this little, I'm a girl, and he's giving me flowers. It just activates this thing in her. And they end up getting married, and it ends up, that she's, they're going to have a kid together, and I just love them. I'm just so glad they got together, and they're just such quirky, nice
and
people.
She fits so well with Greta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just the way they gradually build this romance as kind of in the background of these horrible things that are happening in this season. And that's one of the things I love about the tone of this show, is this mixture of the sweet and sentimental and the pure and just the worst in humanity.
Well, maybe I'm jumping too far ahead, but I also love the way that the relationship between Greta and Lou Solverson, played by Keith Carradine, the way that relationship goes, that's a good relationship. In fact, I liked that. Is it in the last episode or the second to last episode when he's on the porch? I love that scene.
Yeah, the
next morning when she comes out.
The next morning where he's out there tying his rope. Number 2, the transformation of Lester Nygaard.
Yeah. And there's a certain point, let me see if I can hurry and pick out which episode it was. Like episode 9, is that the one in Vegas?
Yeah.
In particular, that change when we see Lester again in episode 9, that one caught me off guard. And Lester is played by Martin Freeman. Mm. That one threw me for a loop. I was like, wait a minute, like, and especially when we see Malvo at that point, like, I'm like, wait a minute, what in the world is going on? And Lester has just changed so dramatically at that point.
Lester is a rough analog to the William H. Macy character in the original film, who's this guy who's kind of this put-upon, kind of short, kind of weaselly guy, the world's all against me, who does something he should not have done, and it gets out of hand, and it transforms who he is.
Yeah.
And you feel sorry for Lester at first. His wife is mean to him. His job sucks. He's still being harassed by his high school bully.
There's a little point where you're kind of like enjoying Lester's metamorphosis. Mm-hmm. Like when he goes and visits the widow, you're kind of like, okay, Lester kind of had this coming. He deserved this.
He is a man who has no courage.
Yeah.
And he then finds his courage.
Yeah.
For the worst possible reasons.
Yes. And in the worst possible ways. Yeah.
So he kills his wife.
But you don't feel bad about the way he goes about it when he's finding his courage with bad people.
Yeah.
Like the widow. Like, she's not a good person.
Taking advantage of the widow for sexual favors.
Yeah.
Who's the widow of the man that made his high school life horrible, and who boasted to him about getting pleasure from the woman who eventually would become his wife.
Yeah.
So there's certain karmic elements to it.
Well, and then when she comes into the office after he's gotten sexual favors from her with the boys, and they're having that confrontation, and Lester grabs the stapler and staples the kids in the forehead, and the way he handles the widow, it was that part you were rooting for Lester.
And it seems like he's going to get caught, and he's like an animal, and he's just looking for an escape. And he, when his brother kind of realizes that he's involved with this crime and basically tells him, "I'm ashamed of you, you should come clean," and that's the moment that he decides, I'm going to screw my brother over, because my brother says what you need is you need to either confess or you need to find a patsy. It's like, you are going to be my patsy.
Well, and even then, Molly is so fixated on him, you're not sure he's going to get away with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he does. And he ruins his brother's life.
Yep. And his brother's wife's life.
Yes. And his nephew's life. And
there was a brief moment where I was like, is he going to, hook up with his brother's wife and take over his brother's family?
Yeah.
And, yeah.
He finds another romantic interest in the girl
from the office.
That always liked him from afar.
Yeah.
And once he all of a sudden has this confidence, they hook up, and his life completely changes in short order, and he comes from a failure to salesman of the year.
Yeah.
And then he overplays his hand, and karma comes back to reap its vengeance.
You haven't talked much about Malvo yet.
Because Malvo is number 3.
Yeah.
Leon Malvo, played by...
Lauren Malvo. Played
by Billy Bob Thornton. Now, Billy Bob Thornton has Coen Brothers cred, and that's one of the reasons why he was cast. So he was in a film from 2001 called The Man Who Wasn't There, which I don't think you've seen.
Not yet.
But you should totally see, because it's really good. And so Noah Hawley, who is the showrunner and principal writer on the series, said that they wanted to get a big name with Coen Brothers cred in this to kind of lend it a sense of legitimacy. And Billy Bob Thornton loved the script. He said in one interview, that he's the kind of actor that likes to imagine the story of his character. It's like, what's the backstory? What's he all about? He says, this was the one exception in his career. He said, this guy, it doesn't matter what his backstory is. He's a force of nature. Came out of nowhere. And
he just doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
I mean, the level of audacity that he has in some of the crimes that he commits.
He's basically a hired assassin/fixer.
Yeah.
That works for an organization run out of an Arizona real estate office. And he's sent all over the country to do different jobs, to kill different people, or to... his secondary story here is where he's helping out the Oliver Platt, the July and January, the grocery king that he calls himself, who's being blackmailed. And he also decides to take advantage of that and run his own blackmail scheme on top of the other blackmail scheme that's going on. But this is just an evil man that also has a weird kind of sense of his own morality and justice to himself. Yeah. He meets Lester in the emergency room because Malvo has been hurt in the situation involving the man that's found in his underwear out frozen.
The guy who he just goes to the office building and drags out by his tie.
Doesn't even hide
Yeah.
what he's doing. And Lester has been punched by his childhood bully, who was now running a trucking company. And they have this conversation, and Malvo kind of eggs him on and says, you know, if this man did this to me, I'd want him dead. It's like, what are you? You're not suggesting that. It's like, well, just give me the word. And he's also being paged about going into his
to see the doctor.
And he's like, yeah. And then he leaves, and Malvo decides to take that as permission to kill this jerk.
Yeah,
which he does
in very dramatic fashion.
Yeah,
and it's blamed on someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and this is one of those unintended consequence things, which is in the original Fargo movie, and which shows up as a reoccurring motif in the later seasons, which is the unexpected collateral damage and aftermath of something, because the man they kill had connections to an organized crime outfit based out of Fargo. And so that outfit sends two hitmen to figure out what's going on, because is somebody trying to hone in our territory? What is this about?
Yeah.
And that adds further complication to the already complicated storylines. Malvo something. Number 4, the teasers for season 2.
Okay.
Which you don't know yet, but had you picked up on it? There's something they keep referencing.
It's not standing out to me right now. I'm sure it will when I start watching season 2, but...
So, there's... After some of the sprees of killing, and Gus Grimley goes to his boss and says, I think I let this Malvo guy, or this suspect away, because it was driving Lester's car, and I ran it, and it's the car that's supposedly stolen. It's like, oh, dang it. So Sioux Falls all over again. And then later, Gus is having a conversation with Lou, and Lou says, do you know so-and-so? So, oh, yeah, he's my boss. It's like, yeah, he's kind of a dick, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's like, we were together on this task force, I think you might call it, back in the late 70s. And then the conversation with Greta, when Lou is playing with the rope on the front porch, and says, well, I did this years ago when I knew that something bad was coming, and I stayed up outside my house all night playing with this rope, waiting to keep my family safe. It's like, well, what happened? Did it come? It's like, oh, not that night, but soon after. And Noah Hawley said in an interview that some people on his staff says, this is season 2, right? It's like, you're setting that up, Sioux Falls, and Sioux Falls is something. And that's what season 2 is going to be about. So it's laying this foundation that we're going to get to see a young Lou and a young Molly, and find out what Sioux Falls is all about. So a nice setup. Number 5, Coen Brothers references to other Coen Brothers films.
Oh, yeah?
So, for example, we have the fact that it's set in Minnesota, and it's about a kind of a nerdy guy that is kind of overwhelmed by life. That's some serious man action. You've got the plot of the guy who runs the gym, or who wants to open the spa, the stupid bodybuilder guy that's burned after reading.
Okay.
You even have a brief moment when they're in a cafe, and there's a special listed that says White Russians. Today's special, which is the Big Lebowski. And so there's just little things like this that are worked in whenever possible as homages to other Coen Brothers works.
Yeah.
Number 6, supporting characters.
Yeah.
It's loaded with them. The Widow Hess, Kate Walsh, who's an interesting character. The second Mrs. Nygaard, say Linda Park, is a Korean-American actress. Even freaking Bo Monk, the odd guy that runs the insurance company, or the couple that comes in to talk to Lester about adding the wife to the insurance policy. And they show up several times later because this is a small town. And of course, he's involved in the very end. There is a little continuity problem there, though, because he talks about how he works in the library. But later, one of the two, the hitmen, complains that this town doesn't have a library. Thinks that all towns should have a library.
Yeah. Adam Goldberg, Tom Musgrave.
Yeah, so those two are great. And kind of a tie-on to that is casting characters or actors who had appeared in Noah Hawley's previous series, The Unusuals, which ran for half a season, 2008. Yeah, 2008-ish, which was about a police department in New York City that basically investigated unusual crimes.
Uh-huh.
And so you had Adam Goldberg was on that series. He was a regular. The woman who played the second Mrs. Nygaard had a recurring part. And the actor who played Lester's brother was also a series regular on that series.
Yeah, Susan Park was the second Mrs. Nygaard.
So that's fun. That's a little good luck charms, little in-reference casting. Number 7, killing the sheriff off in episode 1.
Yeah.
They set him up, and he looks like he's going to be the driving force. And they kill him off at the end of the very first episode, which gives motivation to Molly, added motivation, because the man's her friend and her boss and the person that believed in her and the person that even told her, when I go, you should be sheriff. It's like, well, what about Bill? Bill has seniority over me. It's like, Bill ain't ready for it. Which is true, because number 8 is Bill.
Yeah.
Played by Bob Odenkirk.
Yeah. He plays his part well in this movie.
What a
Or in
wonderful
this
character.
series, yeah.
This is the cop that always wants to see the best in people.
Yeah.
The cop that gets nauseous at crime scenes. And who just will not believe what Molly keeps telling him about the extent of the conspiracy involved. He just doesn't want to see it.
And even when the FBI agents show up, wanting to learn more about what she's going on, he's trying to shut it down.
He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I've been trying. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is great. This is great work.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. And Lester was his childhood friend. He tells this story about when we were sitting together in chemistry class freshman year, and she walks into the room, and you say to me, Bill, she's gonna be my wife one day. And what was that bubble gum that we used to have when we were kids? What was the name of that bubble gum? Hubba Bubba. Oh, Hubba Bubba, that's it.
Yeah.
And the scene where he has adopts the African young man.
Oh yeah.
Sponsors him. And he gets lost, and they have these wonderful little digressions where he had been prompted by just kind of the horrors of what he'd seen to try to put some more good into the world, and so they got this kid who is actually
a refugee.
A refugee.
One of the Lost Boys.
One of the Lost Boys. He's probably around 20 years old.
Yeah.
So he's not really a kid, but his whole family had been massacred. And he ended up with a refugee program, and they were taking him to Minnesota, but there was a mix-up. And he ended up basically going into this grocery store every day for a month and stealing food.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't figure out how to contact the person.
Well, and he lost everything that he had.
Yeah, that's what happened. So he got robbed, and he didn't know the name of the family, didn't know how to contact anyone.
Or even the town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And eventually, Bill runs into him when they're in the city so that his wife can go to the ballet.
Yep.
And this kind of the universe, this is the way Bill likes to think the universe works, is that it's all part of a plan and it fits together. And he just can't take the randomness of the forces that Malvo represents. And he just wants to see the good in people, which is really not the best thing to have in it's admirable, but not for your chief of police.
Yep.
There's that scene where he's preparing for the big snowstorm. That's what he wants to do. That's what he thinks being the chief of police of a small town is about. And that's generally what it's about. It's like getting all the plows out and making sure we can respond to car crashes. And he's in his element there. But he is out of his element when it's coming to mass killings.
Yep.
Number 9. Key and Peele as the FBI agents. Wonderful casting. They took advantage of all this. Sometimes you cast somebody because of what they bring to the part from what you know them from. And so these two bumbling FBI agents that miss the massacre in Fargo when Malvo realizes that he had been betrayed by his bosses at the order of the Fargo Syndicate that wanted revenge for what happened to Mr. Hess. Goes to Fargo, goes into the building that they're headquartered out of, this mafia's headquartered out of, while Key and Peele are in a car outside on surveillance, completely oblivious until a body is pushed out of a window.
And lands on their car.
Malvo goes in there and he massacres the entire syndicate and he gets away, just walks away.
Yep.
It's so good. And they're demoted to the mailroom. And as the other FBI agents continue to basically...
The file room, not the
file
room.
You're right, the file room.
Because if you remove the files, is it still the file room?
Well, if you remove one file, it's still the file room. But let's say you keep removing a file.
Till there
after
are no
another.
files.
There can even be negative files.
Yeah.
How could there be negative files? Well, I'm just saying, is it still the file room? They wax philosophical in their isolation. And the rest of the FBI basically doesn't want anything to do with Molly's theories because, to their mind, the case is closed. It was the Nygaard brother, at least as far as that element of the conspiracy goes. But they're just overjoyed when they find out that they could get this guy, and they're just fun. I'm just glad that they're there.
Well, and that then leads to the redemptive arc with Gus Grimley.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all the things that happen after the flash forward. Were you expecting that flash forward?
No.
So you get to the point where they've basically reached a dead end. It looks like Lester's gotten away with it. It looks like Malvo's kind of disappeared into the ether. And then they flash forward a year. And Gus and Molly are
when
together.
When that happened, I actually felt a little bit lost. I was like, wait a minute, did I miss an episode?
Because it says a year later. It happens towards the end of episode 8. And
yeah, but it's just so sudden. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And so Gus has moved to Bemidji. It was Bemidji, right?
Yeah.
All right. And brought his daughter, and they've got kind of a starter house, and Molly's pregnant. And Lester goes to Las Vegas to get his Salesman of the Year award, where he stumbles upon Malvo, who is engaged in a long-term undercover operation where he's pretending to be a dentist, successfully working as a dentist.
Yeah.
Nobody suspects. And he messes that up and causes Malvo to decide, I'm going to get revenge on Lester. And Lester tries to squirrel away, and it leads to the massacres that end the series.
Including Lester setting up his second wife.
Yeah.
And just letting her walk in and be killed.
Yeah, so he's figured out, he knows who he's dealing with.
Yeah.
And they're wanting to flee the country under the pretense of
a vacation.
And they keep their passports at his new insurance office, and so
because it's in the safe.
He sends her in there and says, honey, it's so cold out. Wear my jacket.
After he previously told her to leave her coat at home.
Yes.
Because we're going to the airport and we're flying to the Bahamas, and you're not going to need a coat.
I know. And then he goes into Lou's place and makes a point of saying, my wife will be here any minute.
And then goes outside and calls in the murder.
Yes, calls in. There's been some shots. And he's a completely different character.
Yeah.
And it is about the horrible things that people are capable of. And it's also about the wonderful things people are capable of.
Yeah.
But Lester is there's something missing.
There was a brief moment where I thought Lester was going to be the one that takes out Malvo. Mm-hmm. When they're at the house and he sets up the bear trap and he's got the gun, and I'm like, oh, this is the completion of the Lester character. And then Malvo gets away. And, for a minute I thought maybe Malvo was going to find a way to survive this when he pulls the bone back into his leg and, all that type of stuff. I'm like, really? He's going to recover from this, And that's when Gus comes in.
Yeah. And Gus has his arc. I mean, there's so many. It's a novel. I mean, it's so intricately pieced together, and everything works and sets up each other, and there's just such a well-developed world. So few flaws, and it's just emotionally satisfying, and it's intellectually satisfying, and it works as a tribute to Fargo, and it's its own thing at the same time, and it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
I absolutely adore this show. And season 1, I mean, I love season 2 so much that they're very neck and neck, and because they have to deal with the Solverson family, they're kind of attached. They could be viewed almost as one season in 2 halves.
Yeah.
Because it's this kind of family story.
Okay.
But yeah, I just love this show. I could go on and on about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's FX really runs. I mean, if you're talking about what's network,
it's the tightest ship on basic cable.
Yeah, and how you never would have expected that 2 decades ago.
No. FX was a vehicle for reruns of The Greatest American Hero and a show called Breakfast Time, and
they used to run a movie called FX. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that?
I'm aware of a movie called FX.
Yeah.
And it also had a sequel, as does FX with FXX.
Yeah. But yeah, it goes back to The Shield, to Rescue Me, to Sons of Anarchy. They've had several. I mean, yeah, they just crank out these series.
One thing you'll also notice with some of the FX series is, to an extent, they operate like an old studio.
Yeah.
Because you will see a lot of the same actors
characters and actors
appear in the different shows that go on FX. And I've seen characters there was a character
Justified
that was killed off on The Americans that all of a sudden shows up as another character on Tyrant. Yeah, it must be a pleasant place to work because people tend to go back.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful show. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or that comes to mind?
No, I think we've touched on everything But yeah, I did like that Gus Grimley gets redemption at the end, and I thought it was really interesting. He gets the 3 shots in, and Malvo's still alive, and he has to empty the gun. Yeah.
And that's actually the Serious Man reference I was grasping at earlier, is the Jewish neighbors of Gus, and how the rabbi tells him that story. And this, of course, is a reference to the Jewish community of Minnesota, where the brothers Coen grew up.
Yeah. Fun stuff. Yeah, this is a great series. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. Check it out.
Yeah.
It's worth the investment in your time.
Yeah, it's fine stuff.
Yeah. Anything else? If not, I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this has been Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. You got your notes? How many pages? Is that episode by episode?
No, it's not that detailed.